Hey, Jeremy, welcome. We're just waiting on a couple more people and then we'll start doing some intro and downloading of some repositories. Everybody needs to make sure they've got some sort of an IDE to use during the course today. If you don't have one, we'd recommend Atom, I think, is probably the easiest, or Visual Studio Code, just for viewing source and doing traces, since this is code review. So make sure you've got an IDE installed. We'll get the repository shortly. Yeah. Hey, all. I know we just had a couple just joined. We'll get started here in a minute. We've got source code repositories that we're going to post to everybody here shortly. I was just saying before and in the chat, Ken mentioned it, that we'll provide the links and we'll provide slides to everybody as well when we get done today, or tomorrow, I should say. But make sure you have an IDE, one that you're comfortable with, that you know how to use, since we are reviewing code today, whether that's Atom or VS Code. I mean, if you even want to use some of the others, you can as well. I'll go ahead and turn my video on. Ken did it. Yeah, what am I missing right now, Ken?
Nothing yet. We're just waiting on a few more folks to join. I'm excited to kick this off and get started. It's going to be a fun couple days, busy couple days for sure. So get ready. There's a lot of exercises. It's yeah, but no, I don't think we're waiting. I think other than waiting for folks, there's not really much that we're missing here.
Yep. Yeah, make sure you got some coffee, right? That's probably the most important thing.
I'm pulling out the big guns for this one there, Seth.
You're pulling out the bang. There we go.
When I start talking a million miles an hour, just be like, slow down.
Yeah.
We'll reiterate this and mention again, but these slides will all be available to you all going forward. So it's not, these slides are not something we're just keeping to ourselves. You'll have this reference material as well. Do you want me to go ahead and upload it now, Seth, or should I wait?
You may want to wait, just in case there's any tweak we want to do to it based on the questions that we have before we push it. I mean, we could push it now and then just update too, though.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just do one now, and then if people ask us to add anything or ask anything that we think, oh, let's add that before we call it a day. Let me just export this.
Just a couple more minutes. We're only missing 4 people. But we're about at the point that we could probably jump into it. Just make sure you got an IDE available. And Nathaniel, you're right. Like, understand that static analysis tool. It's not necessarily security related, but otherwise, right? Be awesome if we could use that to help break things down. Anything that speeds up our understanding of the code makes life a lot easier in our estimation. But we've got some tools and tricks that we'll show you today that seem to work out pretty well. We've been using SemGrep more and more. Ken's got a little section on that we've added to the course for Black Hat. So it should be if you haven't played with SemGrep before, yeah, you should, right? You will after this.
Yeah. And on that note, I'll put this in chat. But this folder, so I just gave the link to where basically the folder where all of the handouts and materials as we progress will be added to this folder. That'll make more sense as time goes on why we have a folder with materials. It has to do with the exercises that we'll be producing output, and so all of this will be saved to this folder, and it's all accessible publicly. We'll talk about it, but our sort of motto is, if the course's sole value is just in our handouts, then we're not doing a very good job. So we're more than happy to provide this long-term, forever in a public repo form.
Yep. All right, we're only missing 1, Ken. So maybe we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like, yeah. And then hopefully he'll join here shortly, or they'll join shortly. But we're excited to have everybody. This is actually, I'm gonna stand up, so that will be awkward if I stand up in front of my video.
I'll do the same.
Before we get started. Sweet. All right, here we go. Thanks for choosing us. Come to the training course with us during Black Hat this year. We're really excited to be here. We've taught this course multiple times and are excited to have to be back at Black Hat teaching it. I'm Seth. You can see Ken there as well, and we'll be taking you through our wonderful adventures of finding bugs in code that we've done over the past couple of years, right? Ken and I have both been around a while, but we'll run through introductions here and go around the room, have everyone introduce themselves so we kind of know who's in the course, who we're dealing with. Start thinking about it, because we are going to separate into groups at some point and be analyzing code together. And we can assign groups, or if people want to work together, they're welcome to do that as well. Just to help in the code review process. Having different sets of eyes is a great thing. Michael, I didn't want to ignore your question either. For the IDE, it does not need to be focused on a particular language. Where this is language and platform agnostic, you could almost just use GitHub if you wanted to, but it makes it a little hard to search and to move around. So pick an IDE that you're comfortable with that has at least some sort of language processing ability. That's the reason we typically recommend VS Code or Atom, because they can parse pretty much anything that's out there. And we'll give you some hints on, actually, tracing the source. The better that it understands the target language, the easier it is to jump around, but it doesn't have to be anything in particular at this point, at least for the examples that we use. So let's jump into it. I'll introduce myself first really quick. My name is Seth. I'm based in Salt Lake City. I run a small consulting firm, Redpoint Security, that's all application security related. We've been doing more and more code review, funny enough, in the last few years, where I look at a lot of source code, everything from Rust to Go to .NET and Java, and even some crazy languages that we get into it at times, mobile, whatever, right? Like frameworks. And anyway, that's my day job. My initial foray into security, my foray into consulting, or to the industry itself, Dustin has joined us as well. It was at iOmega. I started as a Java developer for the zip drive people, if anybody remembers them. Did that for a couple of years before I moved in full-time into security, helping build a pen test team, and then made my way back to application security since I grew up as a developer. So I've been around for a while, at Seth Law on Twitter. Yeah, I guess that's everything about me, but I am joined by my lovely co-host, Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter. Ken, say hi.
A little shout out to the podcast there. But yeah, do you want to hit the next slide there?
Yep.
Well, I can talk about myself while we wait for that.
There you go.
So I am a staff engineering. Now I'm a staff engineering manager. So have more of a boring job as of late. But prior to that, for the majority of the 4 years I spent at GitHub, it's been a lot of code review. I'm based out of Gainesville, Virginia, so I'm not too far from the Dulles Airport, if anybody knows the Northern Virginia, DC area well. So I my background is, I think I started way back. I started in like IT, basically, in routing and switching, and taught myself the program, ended up during the early days of web security, basically experimenting with web security related stuff, testing a lot of apps, but primarily dynamically. Moved more into code review as time went on, and that's where I've spent a lot of my time, most of my time, doing code reviews. So that's the relevance to this presentation or to this training. And yeah, at CK Tricky on Twitter. Next slide. And this is our podcast. If you ever maybe you came here because you've seen the podcast, or maybe you've never even heard of our podcast, but we have a podcast if you're ever interested in learning more about other topics outside of just code review, just anything AppSec related.
Yeah, and Ken and I go back quite a ways, right? The first consulting job that I had was actually at Fishnet Security, right? After I was in the banking industry for a few years. And that's where we met, was doing consulting for a large retailer, I should say, right? Like
Walmart.
Walmart, yeah, exactly. Jeremy, we don't, but we can set that up quick. We could throw it out on, we could use the Absolute AppSec Slack channel and create a branch in there, or a channel in there for it. Ken and I will set that up here shortly, and then we'll send it out. We'll get the invite. I think the invite on the website still works, Ken, too.
Yeah, I'm working on making a channel right now.
Okay. But we've been running the podcast for what, a good 2 years at this point?
Maybe. Oh, no, it's been like 3.
Yeah, exactly.
At least.
2018, I think, is when we started. And we talk about all things application security related. We'll do deep dives into specific vulnerabilities or exploit classes and news and whatever else, and have a lot of industry people come on and tell us about their experience in application security. Anyway, so not super relevant for today, but if you're interested and want to dive deeper, then please jump on in. All right. So what are we doing here today? And this speaks specifically to Michael's question on an IDE, a specific language. And this should have been somewhat apparent from the course description as well, is that we're looking for ways to identify vulnerabilities and exploits in code, even if we're not expert developers in the language that we are assessing. Ken and I, as consultants, were asked multiple times to look at language, and to this day we still are. We're asked over and over to look at languages, to look at applications where we probably aren't the expert in developing, or we couldn't build an application without some serious work on our part in learning how to code in that specific language and framework. And so we've had to develop this approach over the years in finding vulnerabilities and assessing an application from a higher view is realistically all I can say, right? We want to find those as quickly as possible, and we want to give ourselves comfort in knowing that we have identified everything that we can in the time allotted for a specific code review. That's what this course is all about. Ken, what am I missing there?
Sorry, I'm actually adding people as well. Well, the couple things I wanted to add is that, sorry, here's I'm adding people. So, yeah, there's going to be, so first of all, I think there's just a couple things I wanted to just sort of like briefly mention. You'll notice there's a pattern of like unicorns all over this presentation. There's actually a reason behind that. We kind of affectionately refer to this course as the unicorn killer because it's methodology that's primarily just repeatable, right? Like that's the thing, is if you follow a process, you don't need to be like, there doesn't need to be some like secret sauce, rock star knowledge or anything like that. That's the point of this. This is to basically show that it's nothing more than honestly a mundane set of processes and approaches that make a successful code review. So I guess the other thing too is that, on the note of Seth talked a little bit about the fact that, this course is based off of sort of our adventures, and really that means like our experiences with various engagements. So we've got these different exercises and they're going to be they have code names that are basically code names for the various engagements that we've given. So that's just a little background behind all this while I also add people to that Slack channel.
Oops. Yeah. So there's some philosophy that goes into this, right? I'm trying to move windows out of the way so I can actually see. Right. What we're trying to do is increase our likelihood of success, right? We're not going to find every bug imaginable. When we start talking about the millions of lines of code that we're asked to review on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, it's just not realistic for us to assume that we're going to find every single type of bug and every single class of bug that's out there in that time frame. But we want to increase that likelihood of success. We want to be able to know that we've given a good review of like authentication, authorization, and we'll break down the different checklists that we jump into. But it isn't that we're going to find everything, and we should never go into these assessments feeling like we have to find everything. That may be possible if we're actually only given a limited amount of code that we can give the thumbs up or some sort of certification that it's good. But most of the time, the clients, at least in my world, the client is not going to pay for me to review only 400 lines of code or whatever per hour. So success here is defined as we're focusing on what's riskiest for the application. We're as comprehensive as possible within the time frame that's given to us, and we've detailed out what we found in an easily consumed, well-drafted report, along with detailed notes. At times, clients do ask for the notes that we put together. I think, Ken, that's just standard procedure for you, is it not?
Yeah, and we'll get a feel here in a moment for the demographic of like, are you a programmer? Are you a consultant? Are you a defender? I would classify myself right now, my current role as a defender, and in our assessments internally, we give detailed notes on every assessment, primarily for two reasons. One, well, we'll get into that, of course, as we go on, but basically somebody who comes behind you has some information that they might need, which again, we'll get into those details. Also, it's just good to follow a process and make that somewhat transparent to everybody. That leaves everyone with a certain level of comfortability. It's a very practical reason for why we do that.
Yeah. And I realize that we're getting ahead of ourselves. We haven't actually done a roll call and had everyone introduce themselves, Ken. So before we get to this part 2 of the philosophy, let's go ahead and do that. What we'll do is just step through participants, give us a quick introduction, name, current role. You don't have to expose more than you're comfortable with, right? This is Black Hat after all. But let us know what you're working on, like kind of what your role is, and what your background in language development security is, just so we have an idea of where where everyone fits and who we're dealing with. Right? So I'll start with Caleb. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm out of Las Vegas, software engineer out here, and I work on a lot of integration efforts with organizations. So software dev background with a little bit of cybersecurity emphasis earlier in my career. So I thought this would be a good course for me just to get a little bit more breadth and depth. So looking forward to working through it with everyone in the course, and thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Caleb. All right. Good. Christopher?
Hello, everyone. So my name's Chris. I'm a software developer background, currently leading a small team of software developers and data scientists. So I spend more time looking at other people's code than writing my own now. So why I found this class particularly interesting. So
cool. All right. Thanks, Chris. Okay, Diane. And if I say your name wrong, I'm sorry. Go ahead and correct me. That's okay. We're okay with that.
Hey, so first, thanks for the class. So my name is Diane Bothwork. I'm actually getting the training from Zurich. I work at Google Zurich. I'm a security engineer. I've just transferred to a team that works on cloud products security. So I started doing security reviews, and I'm interested in learning more about security reviews, how to be efficient when studying code, looking at the code, getting to the points. And before I was a reverse engineer, so I was doing more like very low level stuff or scripting. So I'm in the middle.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here, Diane. That we would love to get to Zurich and teach you there, but this works as well, right? That's the beauty of being virtual. Good. Dylan?
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Dylan. I've got a good amount of development experience, studied computer science undergrad, but got really excited about cybersecurity, and so started in Red Team Consulting right out of college. I work at a consulting firm in San Francisco, and just really got kind of interested in source code reviews and static analysis, and using that to kind of augment dynamic analysis. So really looking forward to this course and kind of learning you guys' methodology here.
Cool. And we will talk about kind of the different frameworks or the different reviews that we do, Dylan, and that's I mean it fits into that, right? Like we've both jumped back and forth kind of between dynamic and static over the years, and having them both match up definitely helps us find a lot more items. So good. Thanks, Dylan. Dustin?
Yeah.
Okay. Was that is that Jeremy or is that Dixon? Do you go by Dixon? Sorry. Jeremy. Okay. All right. Great. Thanks, Jeremy. And then we've got Dustin as well. Sorry, that was a mix up there.
Yes, sir. So I do primarily Python background. I've been kind of transitioning into a role for managed infrastructure, Ansible, and as I work more with static code versus things that are updated regularly, this has become a big focus for me.
Cool. Okay. Welcome. Good. We got a lot of good background here. So, Ilya, saying that right?
Spot on. Hello, my name is Ilya Rogers. I primarily work in IT management, so writing boring SLAs and MOUs. My education is computer science and programming, so I used to do that quite a bit with a variety of different languages. Nowadays, I'm kind of a script kiddie. So hoping to kind of get back in the fold, looking and writing some code.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Ilya. And then, so Jeremy already went. Michael McAndrew. We got two Michaels, so tell us if you prefer Mike or Michael.
Hi. So either one's fine. I go by Mike or Michael. Basically my background, so primarily worked in cyber defense, but recently transitioned to a new organization that's essentially focused on test and evaluation. And so previously they were more focused on does the system perform as it needs to perform? They're slowly starting to get in the habit of, okay, we need to start thinking about cyber and how this stuff can be exploited. So that's kind of my background and where I'm coming from.
Okay, great. Good. And then, yeah, other Michael, go ahead.
Hey everyone, this is Michael Materi. I am a principal consultant with Mandiant. I've been with Mandiant for just about 5.5 years now. I'm on their red team, so I do network penetration testing, but I also do application penetration tests or security assessments. As of late, I've transitioned into more of the AppSec space, and my testing has primarily been against things like web applications, mobile applications, but it's usually been dynamic analysis. So the goal here, of course, is just to get stronger skills with static analysis. I've been actually doing this a lot lately with .NET assemblies, doing something called chain analysis, and just trying to learn more really about the different approaches and methodology. Really look forward to this course.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Yep. We're happy to have you, right? Like it's definitely the background. Like that's what initially where we're coming from as well. So, Nathaniel.
Nathaniel Johnston, software developer now, kind of more in a management type role. So again, reviewing code a lot more. Started working with Nortel and then moved on into more defense related type stuff for most of the last 20 years.
Great. Good deal. Okay. Thanks, Nathaniel. And then we've got Richard.
Hi, good morning. My name is Richard Scapidi. I've been a programmer for just a few years now outside of school, so I still kind of consider myself somewhat new, and I don't have really any background in security, and so I was trying to learn what I can about reviewing code from a security perspective. I think my current job might involve that in the future quite a bit, so just trying to pick up what I can.
Cool. All right, thanks. Welcome, Richard. And then last but not least, Sam.
Hey all, yeah, my name's Sam. Nice to meet you. I'm coming from ServiceNow as a product security engineer. So my job is to pretty much review code all day for security vulnerabilities. So definitely looking to speed that up to stop the flow of the code I can't read. So happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you, right? And that's definitely where it comes from. It sounds like we got a really good mix of developers, some developer managers, and there's some consultants that are here, some people that are doing this on a daily basis. So we will ask a lot of questions, especially for those of you that are in the space and dealing with code on a daily basis. Just what you're seeing. Obviously, anything that is client sensitive or you don't feel like you can share it with us, that's cool too. There's specific things that Ken and I can't talk about either. So yeah, thank you all for being here. All right, so let's jump back into philosophy. I think we covered part one, which is basically, we're going to take a risk-based approach on what we're looking at and try to make it as timely and comprehensive as possible. So there's some strategies that we use and some ways that we think about security in an application and in code specifically, and indicators that help us speed that along. And like I said, we've proven this methodology out multiple times over the course of our careers, and it started at that large retailer years ago. So part of what we're doing here is language agnostic, or everything that we are, right? We're going to learn how to become an expert in becoming an expert specifically around security features in code. And that is because of the holistic approach that we take. We're going to look at documentation. We're going to look at framework libraries, at READMEs, right? Anything that gives us indicators on how security features are implemented in an application or in a specific framework and language helps us along when we're doing this portion. And then we want a repeatable system for finding these bugs, right? Like we don't want to have to recreate our checklists every single time that we see a new code base, a new framework, a new language. It should be applicable across the board. We may, and this is specific to what Ken and I do, obviously on a daily basis, but even our checklists and our approaches are slightly different based on the organization, based on the contract that I have, and based on our own personal preference. So you may take this and decide that 90% of it is what you want to use over time, or you may decide that you want to change things up. Ken, what else?
I did want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add, like, that we're going to describe when we talk about different review types, and as we go along, we're going to show the most optimal way to use the methodology or the most comprehensive approach using all bits of the methodology. But when applicable, we will explain what parts can be omitted, what you might want to surface just for efficiency purposes. And the way I like to think about it is it took us, basically years and years and years and years to make a methodology like this and refine it over and over again. We've got 2 days with you. So we're going to do our best to give you the information with the understanding that this is a framework you will fill in as you repeat this process over and over again. You'll tune this to be, best for your style. And I think that's part of the sort of like in any progression, that's part of the progression is realizing, okay, here's the techniques, the tools, the methodology, the process that, we use at a high level. And then of course we're digging in at times pretty low level, but either way, you get a sense for how it's supposed to flow. And then you'll develop your own sort of style and tweaks like Seth had mentioned. And we just fully expect that to be the evolution of the process. But like I said, here we'll show you what we can take out, what we absolutely need to keep. And there are aspects there are a few things like you absolutely will always need to do. And we'll talk through all of that. So that's the goal. Cool. And then things to experience. So yeah, talked about it. We're going to cover our stories. We have a different version of this course, which is, the Seth and Ken's Excellent Adventures. All of this, regardless of the title of the course, it's all based off of previous engagements and what we've learned from those engagements. So you can expect that there will be times where, we'll walk through a story in this presentation of why we now do this check or why we now do this certain thing. And it relates back to, some specific nuanced thing that we discovered. And so we'll go through all of that. Obviously, we'll talk about reviewing code. That'd be weird if we didn't. We've got lots of hands-on. We put practice. Listen, this first upfront hour and a half, like a lot of us talking, sure. After that, it is 20 to maybe 30 minutes of us talking. And then it is equal amounts of time of you doing exercises. So this course is actually, the majority of the course is really exercise driven. And just real quick about the structure. Today, we have something like 8 or 9 exercises that we're going to try and get through. Tomorrow, we will do we'll do 2 parts to the day, right? Well, actually, technically 3. Whatever overflow that we weren't usually like later parts of this presentation, like configuration stuff or cryptographic stuff, we might bleed into to tomorrow morning. But realistically, the 2 major components of tomorrow are a walkthrough with an application that we have, and we'll go through all this, where we apply this methodology. We take all of the exercises that you've done, which all build upon each other, and we use them all at once. So today you're slowly building and building and building. And then tomorrow we'll do it together. We'll be driving. And then the second part of that is you all will be paired up into small groups. You will do a real assessment against a real open source app of your choosing, and then you'll all present your notes. you'll go through, and we just are looking to see that you follow follow the process. It's not necessarily that we're trying to get you to find every single bug, or you walk away with like some cool RC. That'd be great, and definitely report that if you find it. But really, the goal is to just to show that you can apply what we've gone through.
All right, so let's talk about approach, right? And this goes back to the different types of reviews that that you can perform, right? So code review is kind of a broad term when it comes to a secure code review. There's these multiple scenarios that I've got listed up here on the screen, right? The first one is kind of this panacea that I get to decide as the reviewer how much time I'm going to spend on the code that I'm looking at, and this is ideal world. This is ideal situation. I know, like being in an organization, this is easier to define. As a consultant, this is something that never happens to me, right? Like even scoping code, it's basically the second one is more realistic to what I run into. Is I basically have enough time to do the risk-based analysis that we're going to talk about, and it's okay, but I'm not going to be able to have. I'm just not going to get through everything. And this is where we go back to that success slide and the philosophy of I'm not trying to find every bug imaginable. I'm going to find what I can in the time that it's allotted, right? And that's the consulting middle ground that we're talking about there. I mean, you'll notice at the bottom, we've got it underlined, right? But why do we say that, Ken, right? None of these types mean run a scanner and analyze the results.
Yeah, we say that because, like whatever you do, and you'll understand, by the end of the day, why we say this. At no point will our recommendation ever be, hey, just go run a tool and get going and like you'll be fine. That's absolutely not the case. Even if you're told that you need to just run, this happens sometimes where we have students who tell us that, in their environment, primarily their team's whole job is to just run scanners and then just like analyze the results. Even if that's your primary tasking, which we could get into why I think that's not exactly useful, or the most useful thing you could do. And there's a culmination of things you can do that are more useful, but either way, even if that's what you're going to do, we have an approach for you here. There are still some things that you absolutely have to do before you go and run that scanner and analyze those results. So yeah, that's why we put that in there.
Well, I'll go back to where Ken and I started working together, right? That was the initial static, or they called it a secure code review at the time, but that was what they had us do, is actually just run a scanner and then eliminate false positives for days on end, right? It doesn't mean that those scanners don't have their place, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. But most of the time, I end up using those as an information gathering process, or as a confirmation that the configuration stuff that I'm doing, that we're going to talk about later, has been valid. But it's never a primary activity of a source code review. The other thing
it was super flawed, right? Like, just to give you context, we're talking about, hey, here are millions of lines of code in C or C that operate a gas pump. We just ran them through Veracode or whatever tool. I don't remember what tool we used. Maybe it was Ounce or something at the time, or whatever it was. Yeah. So here, run this millions of lines of code of C++ or C through a static analysis tool and just tell us what's legit here. That's ridiculous. That's insane and a terrible approach. And again, we'll cover all of that more in detail.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of hours I spent copying input validation errors out of Ounce Labs into a different report format for certain clients, and it wasn't super useful, and it felt bad as a security person that's what our job boiled down to. Hence the reason that the course has come about, hence the reason that the framework has been built. So the other thing I did want to mention is, or I did want to ask is what, like we've got developers in here, we've got managers, developer managers, how many lines of code do you feel like is a reasonable amount to review? So like, let's say within an hour, right? If you're given code to review, like what is your recommended that peer code reviewer could do?
Yeah, just throw it in Slack or in Zoom chat, just a number of lines of code. It depends. Yeah, that's good. That's a good one.
It depends. There we go.
You cheated. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
Like, and this becomes very relevant, especially as a consultant, when somebody tells me that they have, 500,000 lines of code. I've got to estimate how long it's going to take for us to get through that. And I know what there are recommendations that are out there. I'm just wondering how much people have reviewed in the past, or how much they feel is reasonable. Anyone else besides Ilya?
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
5 lines if you don't know what it does. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, Sam, you're absolutely right. 500 to 1,000. That seems pretty reasonable. I know that. Well, there's this article here. Let me drop it up here, and we'll look at it really quick. Or I'll drop it in. Well, here you go. So Smart Bear, right? These are the guys that develop some testing. What is it? Crap. Yeah. What am I thinking of here? Cucumber, Swagger, Soap UI, right? Fewer than 400 lines of code at a time, right? That's the study that they did, that anything more than that becomes less efficient. Is basically what it boils down to. Yeah, take your time. Inspection rates should be under 500 lines of code per hour. And I've definitely noticed that, right? Like from a cognitive perspective, I can't get through 2,000 lines of code in an hour. Right? So I have to be very selective about what it is, like the level of depth that I'm going to. And Richard, to your point exactly, like doing some sort of researching has to be built into that. And so like we've got to take a holistic approach about this on the code that we are spending our time reviewing, because we're only going to be reviewing something around around 500 lines of code per hour, right? We're just not going to be able to get through more than that on a deep, low-level perspective. So there's other things that we can do. There's other indicators that we can use in order to get to that level. That's all I wanted to go into there. So
yeah.
Ken, you want to?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think somebody said it in like recently within the last couple of weeks, which was very spot on, which is, it's not necessarily just the lines of code. It's knowing exactly where to look, like what lines of code are interesting. And yeah, you touched upon it, Seth, it takes research, and that's what we're here to show you, is how to go from source to sync, and then all of the interesting spots in between, right? Like the areas of interest that we'll show you some diagrams here soon of what that looks like. But yeah, we want to show you like where are the interesting parts within an application that you should be looking, when to do your research, where to do your research, what are the typical vulnerabilities that manifest in each of these areas. We walk through authorization, authentication, of course. This stuff is like, we talk about, and we have a slide sort of about here shortly about like, where does OWASP fit in, the OWASP top 10 and all that. Vulns that are specific to the actual technology stack. Again, getting into all this. We show you where automation does fit in. Seth mentioned in the beginning. We're going to walk through, a little bit about SemGrep, just because it's a free tool that's really like, it really, I would say when we first started this course, there was no SemGrep. So a lot of it was pretty manual and pretty inefficient. Whereas now we have SemGrep, which again is free and just makes things easier for us. So we'll show where that fits in. And also we'll talk about like, okay, you're going to use a scanner. Great. Here's where in the process that makes sense. And then, yeah, just validation and remediation of these issues. We'll touch over some of that, because one of the big things that's different between, say, a dynamic assessment where you just have like some sort of proxy like Burp or whatever, Zap, and a running website is that if that's all you have is like a URL and some credentials, it's hard for you to give recommendations that are really like spot on and to the point. Whereas here, you have source code. So you can be a little bit more in-depth and involved in your remediation advice. So yeah, when we talk about hybrid versus pure static, that's where some of that comes into play. Cool.
All right, what we're not doing, right? This isn't secure code or Java secure coding, right? We're not necessarily going to. This isn't a primer on building secure applications, because that's not what we're trying to do, right? We're not going to cover techniques for finding vulnerabilities in running applications. We will touch on some of that. We'll touch on web vulnerabilities. If you want to learn about the OWASP Top 10, we can point you in that direction. We're going to talk to it, but it's not necessarily going to cover all the ways that vulnerabilities manifest in code. Obviously, your own technique, your own code smells, your own gut is going to teach you where to look and what to dive into, especially the experience that you have. The experience in this course is probably going to find different vulnerabilities than Ken or I would find in the same code base. And that's exactly as it should be, because we all have different experience. And yeah, so if you've got any questions, please feel free to speak up and ask us about them. And if you're interested in any of these other things, obviously there's other courses, right? And we can point you in specific directions for any of them, but we're not necessarily going to cover it today. All right, so we finally made it to repositories. This is all the stuff that we're going to look over today, right? Right, and you have 1 hour, go. Right? No.
No. I'll put all these links into Slack and into Zoom, but these are what you want to start downloading. Essentially, they don't take this doesn't take to get clone. It doesn't take really any time at all. So you got that there. It's not something you have to do right this moment. I would say probably, do we want to give like a few minutes here, Seth, for folks to download, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember which one we actually use first.
It's Behem. Yeah, I believe Behema is the first one that we're going to want folks to download. So, but it's going to be a little bit before we get to that exercise. So,
yeah,
we're
going to use. Feel free to just start pulling these down. Make sure that you've got them somewhere locally so you can take a look at them. But
yeah. No, I mean, and while people are doing that, though, we can always certainly get into the next slide there on. So again, those links are in Zoom chat. They're in Slack chat. You can begin get cloning. It does not take long. They're very tiny repositories, purposefully, right? Like these are things that, they're just repos they have specific purposes for what we're trying to get at here with each of these exercises. And again, all these exercises build upon one another. So you'll see by midday what that starts to look like.
Yep. Yeah. So download those, but let's talk about OWASP for a minute before we jump into everything else. So my question to the room is, what is the OWASP Top 10? Right?
So by the way, just real quick, we had a question. Is it okay to run this on Windows, or should everything be downloaded on a Linux host VM? You don't have to run any of the source code. The source code is just going to be something that you sort of, like search through. So you don't actually need, it doesn't really matter. You can download on any system as long as you have an IDE to open up the code. Again, it's all going to be And none of it's going to be like apps that you actually have to run.
Yeah.
Sorry, what
Okay,
was that
so-
question again, Seth?
Yeah. The question is, what is the OWASP top 10? Or what are the OWASP top 10? See, should I call on someone and make it even more awkward? Let's see. Close, Richard. Top 10 web app security recommendations. Yeah, if you're not familiar, yep, top 10 vulns, yeah, affecting web apps, right? Like if we just do a search for OWASP top 10, right? And there's a lot of OWASP top 10 lists, right? But officially, the most popular one is this top 10 web application security risks. Oh, sorry. And what you need to be aware of here is that these are not all of the application or like vulnerabilities that exist that are out there. This is actually an awareness document. So even though there's 10 items listed, it doesn't mean it's only 10 things that can affect the code base that we're looking at. And if you look at the OWASP code review methodology, you will notice that they do dive into other things. As we were building out our methodology, we referred to the OWASP code review methodology as kind of a source or a reference document. We are more agnostic than they are. They do a lot of deep dives into .NET and Java because those are the code bases that they seem to be familiar with, or whoever built it was familiar with. And OWASP does provide a lot of other resources that you can jump into and use for code review, but we're gonna highlight some of the other tools outside of OWASP as well, and the other checklists and reference documents and cheat sheets that are available. But OWASP does provide some of those. If you're looking for specific recommendations around Java or .NET, or looking for a vulnerable application to exercise your code review skills in, OWASP is a good place to start, as well as a lot of the stuff that's going on at Black Hat.
I think one thing I like to add here, as somebody who has done a lot of like internal Defender style reviews, where you're just looking at pull requests, or you're looking at maybe it's an entire app, doesn't really matter. Where our vulns or where the vulns we discover are usually providing the most value. Yeah, sure. In this course and sure in those reviews, we'll occasionally find maybe some injection or CSRF or XSS, something like that. All well and fine, and of course, on the OWASP top 10. However, on the whole, a lot of the most impactful bugs that we find, they have nothing to do with they're loosely maybe in the authorization land type access control stuff. But yeah, it's more interesting. I think you find a lot of logic issues, and just it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to even classify. It might be multiple types of vulnerability classes. So anyways, yes, we do talk about some of the stuff that is inside the OWASP top 10, but we also, discuss a lot that's really not in the OWASP top 10 as well. So that's kind of the relation there. And then I don't know if you want to summarize how it, but that OWASP code review process is just it's super, that document's huge. It's a lot. This is designed to be a little bit more approachable. So
yeah.
Cool.
It's some good reading if you want some background on different ways to search your code, but it does take quite a bit, and it's pretty dry. So, all right, so that brings us to the methodology. Are there any questions at this point? I know we've been talking a lot about what it is, but we're at the point that we're going to dive in, and we'll probably take a break in about 15 minutes, right? So people can, and we will break every hour, usually around the exercises as we're doing them, to make sure that people are able to get drinks and do whatever they need to do, right? Bio breaks.
Yeah, it's easier to take a temperature check on that when people are in person. So virtually we have to just be a little more cognizant of the breaks and whatnot.
Yeah. Yep. So we will make sure that we're taking a 15, 30-minute break, like a morning coffee and an afternoon, whatever coffee break, right? As well as lunch. Okay. All right. So secure code review methodology. This is the overview. in a nutshell, this is what we're going to be doing, right? On over the course of the next couple of days, right? We're going to step through each of these different items, as well as the checklists and what we're looking at within each of those checklists or reviews, those review sections. But the overarching process is pretty simple when it comes down to it. We're going to perform some sort of a risk assessment. We're going to get to know the application, and we're going to gather information about how the application is built. We're going to create checklists based on that, and then we're going to perform those reviews. It's all pretty basic. If you've done assessments in the past, right? Like it's very common to have that 3-step process where you do information gathering, you look for vulnerabilities, and then you do kind of documentation after the fact. And we don't really go too deep into the documentation section because we are talking more about the methodology, but obviously that is something that is very important, and we will talk about reporting a little bit as we get towards the end of the checklist review items. All right, anything else on that, Ken, before we dive in?
No, I mean, I think I'll just cover this real quick. With this, we call it the Circle K framework because, again, it's easy for us we have to put a name to stuff. So we came up with that. But the reason we have this framework here is this is just like a handy cheat sheet guide, because honestly, like I said, this is the most amount of us talking, right? Like there's a lot of information that gets dumped on you in this course. There's a lot that you learn, and it could be just a little overwhelming if we don't give you something to sort of anchor you back to as like, here, when it all boils down, or when you break it all down, it really just comes back to these 7 steps, right? Open a file and take notes, get to know the application, map the application, brainstorm risks, build out these using these checklists we provide you with, because we've got a whole bunch of checklists, and we'll be covering that. It's in this handouts repo. We have some checklists to provide you. You'll build upon these checklists yourselves. You'll take away from it, add to it, whatever. But there's a lot of material here. So just know that this is sort of what you come back to. I think the one thing we liked, you see the refresh icon there. That's a visual reminder for step 7. We walk through an example of this, of course, but one of the things Seth and I have found to be very useful is, yes, all 6 of these steps are great, and there's all of this is great. You should not do it once, though. Like the important thing is to always go back through and just review everything you've done. I can't tell you how many times that I have discovered something just by taking that extra step of going back through my methodology and just being thorough, and then boom, something really amazing comes out of it. So it's not a small thing when I say you should double back, or when we say you should double back here.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had this happen just in the last couple of weeks when Ken talks about doubling back, right? It seems like we spend a lot of time getting to know the application and digging into the specific nuances of how an application implements its access control and its authentication. But doubling back allows us to rethink our approach, right? To come up with more risks to the application that maybe we didn't recognize that first time that we started looking at it, which leads to those vulnerabilities like Ken is talking about, right? Like redirect issues or whatever, right? Like access control and authorization issues seem to be the biggest ones that they're so nuanced on how they're implemented that the understanding comes later on in an assessment rather than right at the beginning. And doubling back makes that more approachable and we discover more of those in those cases. All right. Now, yep.
Yeah, so that definitely does apply. Yeah, no, it definitely does apply. And supposedly short. Yeah, no, it definitely. So this is the thing we talk about. It's like, if you have a time limitation of 2 days or whatever the short turnaround is, there's going to be bits that you take away, and you're just going to sort of omit those. And you're looking at the reality is if you have 2 days, of course, it's not going to be the most comprehensive review that you could have ever done. So in that case, you're going for high impact, looking for things that, if you miss them are going to be serious, like omissions on your end in terms of testing. So we do walk through that, of course. But yeah, that's the point of this framework, is to be very flexible, because believe me, Seth and I have seen it all. We've done it all, for better or worse, and sometimes often worse. We've been forced to do all kinds of different types of reviews.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I mean, you'll be surprised even tomorrow when we step into it, Diane, and when you're doing the open source code review, what you can actually get to in 4 hours, right? Or 6 hours, and how much, what kind of understanding you'll have of a code base. And even some of those code bases are incredibly large after that amount of time, just by breaking it down into approachable steps. And that's where these general principles come into play, right? Giving yourself adequate time, don't make it personal. This is really hard because I have a tendency to go up and down, like my mood, based on how well, like how many vulnerabilities I'm finding in a code base. And it's really hard to admit that a code base is well designed and well implemented when you're paid to find bugs, right? But you can't make it personal, because it could be that that's already been reviewed and they've already done a great job in building security into that code base. But on the flip side, you can't make it personal about the developers either, right? No one likes their baby called ugly. And when you call it out, you've got to be very circumspect about, hey, maybe the approach should be a little different here. Maybe you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And we're all just team members that are trying to build this code base and make it better and make it more secure. Build the code, run the tests. You'll have an opportunity to do that. In some frameworks that works, or in some operating systems. Sometimes that isn't the case. You're not able to do that, but there's indicators that are in there, in the READMEs, in the building, and the tests that give us a lot of good information about what's important in a code base.
I did want to add one thing here too. Just the note on stay on task with current objective. One thing that is, I don't know, I can't speak to why, but I feel like it's become more prevalent that people get distracted with like Slack or Microsoft Teams or some chat thing, and then maybe responding to some emails and just getting distracted. Like, one thing that I don't know if it's fully appreciated is that this is almost, to some degree, I don't want to call it necessarily an art form, because that makes it seem like there's not a way to have a repeatable, like, systematic approach to this, and there certainly is, but it does take concentration. And I see this where people will get distracted. It takes a lot of concentration to understand the context of what you're looking at and not break out of that flow. So one thing that's important is to find your way to stay in a flow zone, as I like to call it. You need to really honestly stay. And sometimes the most, for me, the maximum amount of time I can stay in that usually is 2 hours. Sometimes I've gotten up to 6 hours, but usually roughly around 2 hours, I start to navigate away, check my email, look at other things. And at that point, that's when you just need to stop. You just need to stop, take care of that stuff, walk away from it, and then reset yourself and get back into. I know that's a hard thing to do in today's like multitask centric, fast paced whatever, but this is your job, is to do a code review, not necessarily to check all your IMs and your emails and all that stuff. That stuff should be done in between. So I say that very much lovingly and not in a shameful way, but yeah, you do need to focus when you're doing this.
Yeah. Yep. The other thing, I did want to tell a little story about Ask Questions, right? I had a code base that I was looking at. This was a couple years ago at this point. Bunch of microservices for a company, and they had a QA instance that we're hitting up against as well, right? So it was kind of a hybrid code review / dynamic assessment. we found SQL injection, right, of all things, which is super uncommon nowadays, right? But SQL injection in one of the code reviews and one of the microservices. We're super excited that we were able to dump the entire database from an unauthenticated perspective by hitting this one microservice. So, you know, we set off all these alarm bells. We get on a phone call with the client and the lead developers. And, you know, of course, we're all excited because we've got SQL injection, which is a huge issue. And before I can say anything, right, like we've got the lead developer on the call and I'm like, hey guys, we found SQL injection. And the lead developer said, oh, did you find it here? Right? Exactly the microservice and the file that we found it in. And it just like completely deflated me. And I was like, yeah, we totally did. And he's like, yeah, that's old code. We know that it's an issue. We kind of figured that you would, you know, that something would be there. So good job, but right, like we already know about it. And this all goes back to the initial discussions that you have with the developers, if you have access to them, and asking questions of them, right? What are you most concerned about? Like if I had asked that question up front with these developers, they probably would have said, hey, this is old code over here. And it wouldn't have taken me quite as long to find that problem as it did because I had asked the right questions. And it's always an indicator that, you know, the more that you can involve the developers and the team that is putting together that code base or that application, the better off you're going to be. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to say, hey, what's really old? What is your concern? And then move on from there. Cool. Anything else on those general principles, Ken, before we move on?
No, sir, but you are right. Definitely ask people and communicate if you can. I understand sometimes it's not the case, but yeah. And this slide is really just, honestly, it was what we were going to talk about. Diane asked the question, so we answered already. This is to the heart of Diane's question. This is really what the slide's about. It's like, yeah, there are times where there's parts we have to cut out. So I won't stay on this slide too long and beat that dead horse there.
Yep.
Oh, I guess we could talk about that sign real quick. I don't know if you just speaking of adventures, we just threw this in because there's this funny sign we saw when we were in Australia, like the beware sign. Just made no sense, but there's a commercial behind it that made a little bit more sense. But yeah,
yeah,
silly image that we saw. We're like, why does a rhino on a skateboard have to do with trams?
Trams, yeah. I mean, it'd be like getting hit by one, I'm sure, right? I guess that's where it came from, but. Yeah, that's what it feels like when you only have 2 days there, Diane, to review 2 million lines of code. Yeah, it's difficult. All right, so that brings us to note taking. This is Ken's favorite topic, right?
It actually is, sadly enough. Yeah, so as you can tell, as everyone can tell who's following along, a lot of this first part is a lot about the soft skills, the background behind it, before we dig into the hardcore technical stuff. And so I'm still very much a fan of soft skills. And I think this is an important thing. I think it's very important to annotate some of these things, and you'll find out why we do some of this stuff. And we'll dig into each of these, but this is the just the basic generic sort of format of what it'll follow, right? And I think the important things to call out here are just that, one thing people always ask is like, why the commit number, right? I always like to, at the point I do an assessment, if I have a get commit number, I like to have that available. That way, anything that's changed after my review, someone can kind of do a diff on of the new changes. Or if something was identified, like say through a bug bounty program, a vulnerability was identified in the source code that I reviewed, I like to know, hey, was that, in the commit, in the code that I reviewed? Or is it something that was introduced later? And why that's important is not necessarily to be like, oh, I made a mistake, I stink. It's really just to sort of say, okay, well, how do I revise my process to not, miss that next time? So totally important thing to do. The rest of this I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide just because we're going to run through a lot of this stuff. But ultimately, you see that on the right side, you see that term threat model. It is a lot like this process in the early stages. It's a lot like running a threat model. Just a little bit more, digging in on the implementation details in, say, a threat model that might be a little bit more zoomed out.
Yep. Yeah, well, and this goes back to open a file and take notes, right? But we're going to make it repeatable with some sort of a structured notes.
Yeah, and this is an example of what it looks like.
Let's see, do we have this? Let me see, it's in handouts, right?
Yep. So you should see example template should give you some, if you can scroll down, notes for your team. So that's kind of like, we have templates for everything that we're going to do. You're going to be able to copy all of these when you go to take notes and then just fill them in. But yeah, that's, the gist is, if we go back to that slide, this is just an example of the sort of like generic output for how it looks. So if you want to go to the next slide there. Cool. Review types. So this is where we talk a little bit about the actual types of reviews that go on and what we're going to kind of discuss here. So I'll talk to the full assessment bit here. In a full assessment, pretty much everything is applicable, right? Meaning inside of our methodology, there are many sections to our methodology and our checklist, and pretty much all of it can be, considered relevant. And how much you do or do not use of that is going to kind of be, sort of like a constraint on your time. That's usually what it comes down to, is time. But in a full assessment, everything's applicable. When we talk about only new code, this is where we look at, like, hey, is there a pull request? Not a pull request, a commit number, I'm trying to say, a commit number. And then do I need to check out the diff between the last set of code that was reviewed and the new code? Have I seen this app before, right? Like, maybe this is just a small addition to some app I've already reviewed. In this case, the large portion of the upfront work of mapping an application, of learning about it, of finding out about its technology stack, identifying risks based off that information, all of that is already done. So you don't have to, you just pretty much read back through your notes to gain context. A lot of that is about you already have the context. Now you're just looking for any flaws based off of what you already know about the application. Whereas now a pull request review is different than the only new code thing. And yes, you might be reviewing only new code in a pull request, but the reason there's a entirely separate number here of pull request review is that sometimes, and this happens very often with our work at, like I said, I work at GitHub. We might look at a pull request for something we're not even remotely familiar with. And we have to gain context very quick on what we're looking at. That's actually the hardest part about a pull request review, is understanding the context. And you might see 5 lines of new code in an authorization specific thing that's being added. But, now you're talking about, okay, well, we're inheriting from another class. And does this, is this overriding some authorization defined somewhere else? Or is it defining that authorization in the pull request? If it's not, then I got to go do some digging, which means, again, like, doing a lot of it just requires a lot of understanding the context of the application. So again, what you'll notice in all of these, like the scanner findings one is sort of just, that's kind of us joking around. Like, yes, obviously you're gonna still need to know the context of that application. And that's pretty much for all 4 of these. The thing is, we're going to walk through here shortly the mapping, the technology stack, behavior profiling, all of that. All of those bits are relevant in every single one of these scenarios, because every single one of these scenarios requires context. And that's kind of what we want to drive home here. Seth, is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, the reason that we say meh on the scanner findings is because it doesn't give us that context, right? Like, if all I get is output from a scanner, it's very difficult to establish that context to really determine what is a vulnerability and what isn't. And that's where you, as a code reviewer, that's where your expertise lie, is determining what that context is and what's actually relevant. So each of these, like, most of what I end up doing is probably full assessment because I'm an external third party to most of these code bases. But when I was internal to an org, like you are, right, like the pull requests and new code reviews seem to be fairly common, like, what Diane's looking at. And to your point, right, and even what Richard said about 5 lines of code, right, pull request review could very well take 2 days to review 5 lines of code, depending on how much context you need and what it is you're trying to dive into.
Oftentimes I have to say, sometimes it's less frustrating to review an entirely new app than it is to get some pull requests. And sometimes it's like 40 file pull requests with very limited context into what I'm looking at and what's important. And, it's sort of like, okay, that takes so much, brain power and focus versus a new app where it's like, as you go, you'll understand that this framework is very easy and very repeatable to follow. However, when it comes to a pull request, you now need to extract certain bits of the methodology and apply them a little bit differently. And so in my opinion, I think pull request review is actually harder than a full assessment in some, not in all cases, but certainly in some, certainly in the larger pull request reviews too.
Yep.
So Seth, this next section, before we get into it, I think it might be a good time to take a break because we are about to get into the actual core methodology. We've talked about all the soft skills stuff so far.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you want to do? 12 minutes, right? Should we just break until 12? Yeah.
Should give everybody the opportunity to download those repos and sort of, get refreshments and all that.
Yep. Okay, so go grab a cup of coffee. We're going to dive into application overview, risk assessment, actually start looking at some code. Make sure you've got that all downloaded before you get back, and we will start back up in at whatever 20, right? So for me, it's 11:20. For I guess 10:20 would be the Pacific time, right? Black Hat time. So, yep. Go take 10 minutes. Take a bio break, get what you need, and then make sure you've got that downloaded, and we'll pick it back up in 10 minutes.
All right. See y'all in 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Thanks. Oops.